Welcome to this mini lecture on the sociological imagination. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to connect your personal experience of going to university to the broader social forces shaping access to post-secondary education. So think for a minute, why are you attending university? Here you are in this moment, maybe starting your degree. How did you get here? What motivated you to go to university? Why did you pick this university and country? When something good or bad happens in our lives, when we start a new school, make a change in a relationship, maybe start a relationship or end a relationship, change jobs, we often credit ourselves alone. If it's good, we congratulate ourselves. And if it's bad, we blame ourselves. And we know that Mills drew a connection between our private experiences and broader public trends. Mills argued we have unique biographies, personalities, social circles, habits, and resources, and at the private level, these unique circumstances shape our lives. But there is more to consider. We're also affected by broader institutional changes in the economy, politics, media, the legal system, and so on. So our key question for today's lecture is, what are the public roots of your decision to attend university? And we'll draw upon Mill's language here of private troubles and public issues. So using the sociological imagination, we will ask more broadly, shifting away from your own biography to broader questions of access to education, including who goes to university? How is university attendance shaped by generation? And is this a private decision or a socially structured practice? Hint, sociologists are going to argue this is socially structured. I'd like to start by asking you 4 questions. And you can just consider these as I ask them to start building up your own biographical narrative. First, did you have a male parent or guardian attend university? Second, did you have a female parent or guardian attend university? Third, did you have a male grandparent attend university? And 4, did you have a female grandparent attend university? Now I invite you to consider your own family's education biography in comparison to a typical UBC Introduction to Sociology class. This poll was actually conducted with real Soci 100 students at UBC. We can see here data about university attendance rates for students' parents and grandparents. Take a moment to try to identify the trends emerging in this graph. Think about what you see based on generation and gender. If we look at the grandparents cohort, we can see that it was much less common to attend university for this generation. About 30% of male grandparents and 10% of female grandparents are reported to have attended university. So overall, university was a more elite and unusual institution generations ago. It was not common for the average person to attend. Higher education was also not needed for many jobs in the past. The economy itself was different. Industries were more based on natural resources, for example, where a young man with little education could work in the field doing physical labor and receive a reasonable wage to support a family. Even jobs that didn't used to require post-secondary education now do. This is called over-credentialization. as we see not just a high school degree required, but an undergraduate degree or perhaps a master's degree and maybe eventually a PhD for the same job as competition increases and the education system spreads more widely. Looking at the parents' generation, we can see higher attendance rates, with between 60 and 70% of male and female parents attending university. At this time, more universities had been built, and there was more public and institutional funding for elementary and high schools. And there's some important gender dynamics at play here. If we were living during the time of your grandparents, I probably wouldn't be a university professor as a woman. For the grandparents' cohort, many institutions didn't even admit women, and women were less likely to apply or to complete high school. We see a major shift in the parents' cohort, particularly with the rise of feminism and the entrance of more women into paid work. Whereas previously, likely for the grandparents' cohort, women were expected to work for free in the home as their primary job and responsibility. But there's a third factor to consider here, and that is a bias in the sample. Everyone sampled here is currently in university, represented by the your cohort bars. And we know that having parents who attended university gives you a higher likelihood of attending university yourself, because there are various socialization and access barriers. If we were to take this poll in an average Canadian city, just on the street, we would find lower rates of university attendance in parents and grandparents cohorts. So we need to keep in mind who we are sampling and how that will affect the patterns in the data. So in relation to these broader trends among Soci 100 students, how does your own biography compare? What are some personal reasons why your biography is as it is? And what are some historical reasons why your biography is as it is? There are additional trends to consider when examining access to university. Here we see data about family income and parents' education. In this sample collected by the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario in 2011, university attendance rates across all people that were polled was 39.3%. But this changed depending on family income. If your family income was below $50,000, your likelihood of attending university dropped to 30%. But if your family income was above $50,000, your likelihood of attending increased to 45%, a significant class difference. As I mentioned a moment ago, whether your parents attended university shapes whether you will attend. The children of parents that have no post-secondary education have a 23.5% chance of attending university, whereas the children of parents with at least some post-secondary education have a 46.5% chance. We can also consider access differences based on other factors. If you live in an urban center, you are more likely to attend university, almost 10% more likely. Race and ethnicity and colonialism also factor into university attendance. We can see here that non-Indigenous people in Canada are more likely to attend university than Indigenous people. And we can ask how universities themselves are colonial institutions if we think more broadly about the role of residential schools and the ongoing curriculum content. And lastly, we can think about ability and disability. You are much more likely to attend university if you do not have a disability. And how are university classrooms and practices themselves organized around particular bodies and expectations that create forms of impairment? And we can shift outside of Canada to think about this in global context. The country that you are living in affects your likelihood of completing a university degree. The Conference Board of Canada compiled this data in 2010. It documents the percentage of the population at a national level ages 25 to 64 with a university degree. We can see that if you are living in Norway, you are much more likely than if you are living in Austria to complete university. Canada gets a B grade according to this scale, falling just above the center. Take a minute to brainstorm some of the national level factors that might shape an entire population's access to university. Think about things like funding for the education system and how affordable university is, for example. And now let's return to a broader question. Mills wrote that neither the life of an individual nor the history of a society can be understood without understanding both. And this is because society influences individuals, but individuals also influence society. So within the context of our example, access to education influences who we are and who we will become, but we as individuals can also reproduce and reshape the education system. How do you as an individual reshape education? One example is international students choosing which country to attend university in. We've seen recently international students choosing Canada more often in comparison to countries like the United States because of the ongoing political context in the United States. This is a new historical shift and one that will impact Canadian and United States society. We can also think about students and professors and administrators calling for the decolonization of education, led by powerful Indigenous activism and generations of work. How will the education system change in response to these demands for action? Universities can feel like they would happen regardless of what individual people do. But if we didn't all get up in the morning and log into the university website or go to the university, it wouldn't exist. It relies on individual people. Societies are just the aggregated actions of every single person. So as we go about our daily lives, Mills asks us to imagine, how are we reproducing and recreating the very structures that we live in? And if we don't like some of those structures, how can we modify them through modifying our own behavior first? So what is the big takeaway point from this lecture? The so what? In sum, the sociological imagination seeks to reform and reimagine the way we look at individual agency within our world and make sense of individual, communal, societal, and even global hardships and opportunities in an effort to solve them together. Mills asks you to consider, what is the root cause of the challenges you face? Which factors are within your control and beyond your control? How can each factor best be addressed? And how does the sociological imagination do this? It does so by asking some key questions, including, what is the structure of this particular society at this moment? What are its essential components and how are they related to one another? How does it differ from other varieties of social order? Where does this society stand in human history? What are the mechanisms by which it is changing? Using the sociological imagination in our personal lives pays off in at least 4 ways. The sociological perspective helps us critically assess common sense ideas and addresses root causes. What we think might be causing our problem might not actually be the fundamental cause. If we figure out the root cause, this can help us make informed decisions about how to act. The sociological perspective helps us see the opportunities and constraints in our lives. It allows us to imagine what is happening outside of ourselves to see how the benefits and challenges we encounter are structured so that we don't just blame and credit ourselves alone. Third, the sociological perspective empowers us to be active participants in society. Mills acknowledges that structural forces can limit our options and choices, but he also feels that we as individuals reshape society through our actions, so our actions matter. And 4, the sociological perspective helps us live in a diverse world. Our actions are structured and other people's actions are structured. How can the sociological imagination help us interpret, understand, and have empathy for the situations of others? At an academic and professional level, the sociological imagination allows for policy problems to be identified, focused on root cause. The sociological imagination also helps clarify how sociology is different from other disciplines like psychology, which take a different lens. I encourage you now, as you go about your day-to-day activities, to ask, what would Mills think about this situation? How can I address it sociologically using this unique set of tools?